Hello everyone, welcome to Kelly's Art Throb. I'm Kelly, and today I'm going to be doing another loose, organic, intuitive painting with some ink on top. So join me for a relaxing 45 minutes or so, and I'll tell you a little bit about the painting as we go. I've been feeling a lot freer lately, and I think it definitely comes out in the kind of art that I feel like I want to create. So lately it's been more loose and just very intuitive. It definitely echoes the emotional feeling of well-being that I've been having lately. The inspiration for the colors in this painting came from some rain that we had recently, and the temperatures cooled way down to the low 60s, and being outside felt very cool and misty and refreshing and maybe a little minty, if that makes any sense. Today I'm using Arches cold pressed paper, Daniel Smith Cascade Green, Burnt Sienna, and Neutral Tint. I'll be sure and put a list of supplies in the description below. I really enjoyed the painting that I did last time, and I've been allowing myself to continue that because it feels really good. The paintbrush just echoes however I happen to be feeling at the moment, and it goes where it wants to, and I just let it. And there's an intense feeling of freedom in that. I'm using, I think it's a 0 round brush for this part. I wanted to do some very thin lines. I don't know if you've noticed, but I really like fine, thin lines sometimes. While I'm doing this voiceover, it has gotten hot and my husband's office is upstairs, so the air conditioning is running almost constantly, and I hope that that doesn't interfere. I had a couple comments on my last video that my voice had been drowned out by the music, and honestly, it sounded perfect on my headphones. So I'm trying to balance out what it sounds like for each of you. Hopefully it isn't causing any kind of a distraction this time, and I'm getting it figured out. Also, I'm rounding the lines where it meets some of these organic shapes. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about that. Recently, I've been seeing more and more pushback for artists using the term neurographic art. And as far as I can tell, none of us are actually infringing on a copyright or a trademark, because you can't copyright an art style. However, life is very short, and I don't care to get embroiled in any kind of controversy, at least not unnecessary controversy. I also don't want to get into a place in my life where I'm afraid of any kind of conflict. Sometimes it's necessary, but you know what? When it isn't, it isn't. So from now on, I guess I will call them connections or softening or something like that. I felt that I wanted to give this organic shape a little more distinction, and I wanted to play on some of the contrast part of the paint that was inside of the shape. I'm using a wet on wet technique here to let the intenser part of the color fade in to, or I guess fade out into some of the lighter parts of the shape. And again, I'm using that very thin, round brush. I think that anyone else who wants to do this can, you really have to figure out what brushes you enjoy using and figure out which ones work best for you. And same for paper and same for paint. I'm happy to share what I'm using, but I encourage anybody to try out their own supplies and figure out what works for you. For most paintings, I feel like you will have better results for sure if you use a better paper. Now, what a better paper is for one person is not necessarily what somebody else likes to use, but by and large, when I'm doing this kind of painting or any of my quote-unquote serious paintings, I definitely prefer to use professional watercolor paper, 100% cotton watercolor paper as opposed to a cellulose paper. That's my preference. And also brand and whether you like to use hot press or cold press is a very personal choice. But I think Among most watercolorists, most of us would agree that anytime you're going to use wet on wet and wet your paper a lot, probably a cold press paper will help get the results that you're looking for more than a hot press paper will. But I use hot press paper a lot and I like it. I also have some soft press paper that I bought a long time ago. Fabriano Artistico soft press has been discontinued though, and sometimes I like it and sometimes I don't, and I couldn't tell you exactly why. I sometimes wonder if there are variations in how well a paper is made, like if it's at the end of a production or the beginning of a production. Maybe quality isn't quite the right word, but differences. I don't know. But I do find it interesting how I can really enjoy a paper, the soft press paper sometimes, and other times I just don't feel like I've gotten out of it what I got the last time. Maybe that's why they discontinued it. I don't know. I really don't know any other artists who use soft press paper. So maybe it was just a preference that no one had. And so maybe that's why it got discontinued. I don't know. I don't want to really claim any authority about the knowledge of these things. I'm sharing my own personal experiences with you guys. For me, neutral tint is a wonderful way to add shadow and depth without changing the color of whatever I'm using too much. I feel like it definitely adds more shadow and still allows, depending on obviously the concentration that you're using, but it seems sheer enough that it allows the background color to come through. I guess it's more transparent. Sometimes I use ink to make lines or stipples or some kind of a pattern to make something recede. And sometimes I combine them. But I really liked the way transparent glaze of neutral tint added to the depth of this particular shape. Something I often do with ink when I'm shading or hatching is I start the line out with more pressure and then kind of flick it, and it gives the line more heaviness at the beginning than at the end. And I found myself doing this with the paintbrush very unconsciously. It wasn't something I was specifically aiming to do. It just sort of happened, and I like the result of it a lot. And then of course sometimes I did it the normal way where I just came back with either a much more diluted brush with more water and less pigment, or mostly water, and then let that kind of feather into it. I found that I liked taking the neutral tint and that very thin round brush and outlining the shapes just a little bit. Gave it a little more definition, and I like the way it turned out. Here I felt like I wanted to add another organic shape to sort of ground the rest of the painting, and I did it with the neutral tint. Have you ever noticed that a lot of watercolor artists have a lot of different palettes? It's kind of funny how I probably have 3 or 4 palettes that I use a lot. And then I have a few palettes that I don't want to get rid of, but I almost never use. This palette has a lot of different brands and just kind of a Duke's mixture of all the colors I like to use. And it allows me a lot of freedom. I guess freedom is kind of the theme or the watchword for the last couple of paintings. Creative freedom, a freedom like maybe a lightheartedness, a lifting of spirit. I definitely think I think I'm very influenced in my art by whatever is happening in my head or my surroundings, or just life in general. I don't know if other artists are influenced as much that way. Probably all of us who like to do more intuitive art rather than technical art. But I like to do technical art too. It just depends. I sometimes think that my art style is never going to become defined because I don't know, I just have so many different ideas all the time, and they're all really different. All right, now I'm going to get into the inking of this drawing and adding some textures and lines and whatever I want to put into this painting with the feeling I get when I use ink and a pen. So recently my husband and I've been watching some television movies that talk a little bit about integrating technology with people. And we discovered this show called Upload, and it's about a guy who is killed and his consciousness is uploaded into an avatar, and people can buy real estate in basically a digital habitat for a better lack of, I don't want to give it away if you guys ever want to watch it, but it's kind of where rich people go when they die. If they don't want to die, they can spend a whole lot of money uploading themselves into this environment. And the more money you spend, the more posh it is, basically. And I don't know if I could ever put myself into that kind of thing, because you're kind of at the, well, not kind of, the people who've done this are at the mercy of the corporations who run the environments. So I wonder if they could just raise your rates and continually raise your rates, and you have to depend on people who are still alive to make sure that you're taken care of. I don't think I would like that at all. I think I'd rather just pass on into oblivion and not know anything. But then my husband watched another movie, and I can't remember the name of it, but he was telling me about it, and it starred the actor who was the main character in Upload. I think it was called Simulant. He was telling me about it. I don't want to give it away for anybody who wants to read it, but basically you could download yourself into an artificial body when you die. And there were all kinds of legal and interesting ramifications for doing that. And to most people, they would think that how wonderful it would be. You could just download your body into this, or download your mind into this wonderful, perfect body, and basically have immortality. But I will tell you, the one thing that struck me is if you're a couple and your spouse dies before you, and so you have them put into their ideal body, what if it's been many years since they had that ideal body? Wouldn't that be weird? Like, it might be okay for the guy. I mean, he might like to go back to having his wife in her 25-year-old body, but for the woman, I don't know. I don't think I could handle that. That first of all would be very creepy to me. Okay, well, and here's the other thing. What if your spouse wanted to, like, what if you had, not you necessarily, but what if somebody had a spouse who wasn't particularly ethical, and none of us look like we did when we got married, right? So what if one spouse wanted their spouse to look like they did when they were much younger? It's like, see them from the time they were like 25 or 30 to being in their mid 40s or 50s or 60s and go, nah, I want the younger model. Could you see that happening? That somebody could murder their spouse so they could get the younger version of them? And then, okay, in this movie, the simulants didn't have the same rights as regular humans. So like I don't know if you guys ever watched I, Robot or read the book I, Robot, and they had the 3 laws of robotics that like a robot couldn't harm a human, a robot couldn't cause harm to come to a human by not acting, and I think the 3rd law was a robot wasn't supposed to allow harm to come to himself unless it conflicted with the 1st or the 2nd law. Anyway, in this movie, the simulants have a lot more restrictions even than those. So at the time you might like sign the contract to have yourself put in your simulant when you passed away, what if the laws changed significantly from the time you signed the contract to when you got put in your simulant body? And then your spouse would have a whole lot more power. The whole relationship dynamic would change, wouldn't it? I mean, yeah, I think it would be a really unhealthy thing personally. And with the advent of all the AI technology, and this is just my personal point of view, but like, I don't think of my car as a slave. It doesn't have a consciousness. It might have some programmed intelligence, but it's completely algorithmic. It's not real consciousness. Do you know what I mean? So I don't feel like I'm taking advantage of my car or exploiting my car in any way. But if we start to endow our appliances with real sapience or self-awareness, I feel like then it becomes this really horrible area of where you really are kind of enslaving someone, because they can think, they reason, they have, I don't know, anytime someone conscious, self-conscious, self-aware is denied their autonomy, I think that it's a really, really bad thing. And I don't know. I'd be interested in what you all have to think about that. Any thoughts? Any discussion? Yeah, and I don't want it to become contentious. I like thought experiments, and sometimes I wonder what other people think about this stuff. And not in a, definitely in a respectful way, if you're interested in putting your 2 cents out there. I also recently started really watching I watched Shiny Happy People, and there was a lot of stuff I didn't know about, but I remember watching the Duggars a couple of times, that 19 Kids and Counting or 18 Kids and Counting, whatever, and I remember thinking how attractive that looked from the outside, because how amazing to have so much order in your life while you're raising so many children. And there was a part of me that was a little bit attracted to that as a mom, who my house was never that organized and there was never that much order. Thinking, I wonder how they do that, really how they do it. And I only watched it a couple of times, but then, you know what? I think I can live with a little chaos. And on that note, you guys, thank you for spending your time with me, and I will see you in the next video. In the meantime, take care and smooches.